Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at something that hopefully we never have to use, but that every dog owner should know, and that's what to do if your dog is choking. We're going to be referencing this awesome guide, What to Do If Your Dog Chokes, a life-saving guide to do it.
It's a great resource. You think about it like a first aid kit, but for knowledge. You don't need it every day, but when you do need it, you really need it.
That's very true. So
Yeah.
let's equip ourselves with that knowledge.
Hmm.
Now, the guide stresses the importance of staying calm, which is easier said than done in a moment like that, right?
Absolutely. It is. And the reason for that is because our brains are wired for that fight or flight response. So when we see something that's potentially dangerous, our brains kind of go into overdrive and we can't think straight.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like hitting the pause button on the panic so we can think clearly.
Yeah.
So we've managed to stay calm now. What?
Well, the next step really is assessment. So you need to figure out, okay, how serious is the situation? Is my dog coughing? Is he gagging? Is he unable to breathe? What's going on?
Right. Because I remember from the guide, if a dog can still make noise, it means their airway isn't completely blocked and they might be able to cough it up on their own.
Exactly. But if they're silent and they're struggling to breathe and their gums are turning blue or gray, that's a much more serious situation and we need to act fast.
Okay, so let's say it is serious. What do we do? Do we go straight for the Heimlich?
Well, not quite. The guide says that we should check the mouth first, but we need to do this carefully. So we're just looking for an obvious object that we can easily and safely remove.
And the guide stresses that we should only remove it if it's loose and we can do so safely. We don't want to accidentally push it further down.
Exactly. We're not doing surgery here. We're just trying to see if there's something that's, easy to get to, if it's really lodged or we're not sure, just leave it alone.
Right, so the object's out of reach Heimlich time.
Right. The Heimlich maneuver uses abdominal thrusts to force air from the lungs and hopefully dislodge whatever's stuck. And there are instructions in the guide for small and large dogs.
Oh, interesting. So there are different techniques depending on the size.
Yeah, because their anatomy is a little bit different. For small dogs, you can hold them against your chest, almost like you're cradling a baby, and then you would do your thrusts upwards.
So like a hug. But with a purpose. What about big dogs?
With large dogs, you'd be standing behind them. You want to wrap your arms around their waist, place your hands just below the rib cage.
Okay, I can picture that. Now, what about different breeds or, health conditions? Does that change things?
Yeah, so with brachycephalic breeds like your bulldogs or pugs, they've got those shorter snouts. So you might need to adjust your hand placement a bit higher on the abdomen.
Oh, that makes sense. I wouldn't have thought of that. What about health conditions?
If your dog has a back or neck injury, you'd want to be extra careful with the pressure or maybe even consult with a vet for alternative methods.
So it sounds like we should have a general understanding, but also know our dogs and be prepared to adjust things. Are there any other tips about the Heimlich itself that the guide mentions?
Yeah, one thing that it really emphasizes is to use quick, firm thrusts. So you're imagining that you're really trying to expel the air from their lungs with each thrust. Not a sustained pressure, but a sharp burst.
I see. So it's about the force, not just squeezing. It's a lot more than just a hug.
Yeah, you really want to dislodge that object. And speaking of practice, the guide even recommends practicing on a stuffed animal or a willing friend just to get that motion down.
That's a good idea. People are often afraid to practice, but in a real emergency, you don't want to be hesitating.
Right, being familiar with the technique beforehand can really make a difference.
All right, so we've tried the Heimlich a couple of times, and it's not working. What next time to call the vet?
Well, before we jump to the vet, there's one other thing that the guide suggests trying, and this is particularly helpful for smaller dogs. It's back blows.
Back blows. Okay, tell me more about that. How does that work?
So if your dog is small enough, you can hold them upside down, supporting their chest and head. And then you deliver sharp blows between their shoulder blades with the heel of your hand.
Oh, so you're using the force of the blows to try and knock the object loose.
Exactly. Now, if they're too large to be held upside down, you can position them so they're leaning forward, and you apply those blows in that same area between the shoulder blades.
So you're kind of helping gravity do its job. I bet there's some good diagrams of this in the guide.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sometimes it helps to have that visual.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've tried the Heimlich, we've tried back blows. Hopefully by this point the object has been dislodged. But I feel like our journey's not over yet.
No, you're right. Even if your dog seems to be breathing normally, again, a visit to the vet is absolutely necessary.
Now that might seem counterintuitive to some people. Why is it so important even if the dog seems okay?
Because choking can cause internal injuries that you can't see. The force of the object, or even our attempts to dislodge it, can cause bruising, swelling, even tears in the trachea.
So what we see might just be the tip of the iceberg. There could be a lot more going on beneath the surface.
Exactly. A vet can assess the situation, check for those hidden injuries, and make sure that your dog makes a full recovery.
Wow, so it's not just about saving your life in the moment, but also protecting their long-term health. This is really eye-opening.
It is, but knowledge is power, and having this information can really help you act quickly and confidently in a situation that can be really scary.
Absolutely. And speaking of being proactive, I think it's time we talk about prevention. After all, wouldn't it be great if we could avoid this whole choking scenario in the first place?
Oh, for sure. Prevention is key. And luckily, when it comes to choking hazards, there's actually a lot we can do to minimize the risks for our dogs.
I'm all ears. What are some things we can do to make our homes safer and prevent those choking incidents from happening?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to just being aware. Sometimes it's the things we least expect that can be the most dangerous.
So it's not just like rawhide or those tiny squeaky toys.
Right. We also need to think about things like children's toys, especially those with small parts that can break off, or even things like socks, bottle caps, fruit pits, all kinds of stuff that a dog might decide to try and swallow.
Okay, so we really need to look around our homes from a dog's perspective and think about what could be a potential hazard. What else does the guide recommend in terms of prevention?
It talks a lot about choosing the right kinds of toys. So you want to avoid toys that are easily chewed apart or that have small parts that can be swallowed. Look for things that are made of durable materials like hard rubber or nylon.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
And I've heard that the size of the toy matters too, right?
absolutely. A toy that might be safe for a large dog could be a choking hazard for a smaller breed. So the guide suggests using something called the tennis ball test.
The tennis ball test, what's that?
It's a really simple way to check if a toy is too small. Basically, if the toy can fit completely inside a tennis ball, then it's probably too small for your dog, no matter what breed they are.
Oh, wow. I like that. It's a really easy rule to remember. All right, so we've talked about toys. What about food? Can that be a choking hazard too?
It definitely can, especially for dogs that tend to gulp their food down without really chewing.
Oh, yeah. My dog inhales his food. It's like he's afraid someone's going to steal it.
And that's where slow feed bowls can be really helpful. These are bowls that have raised sections or obstacles that make the dog slow down and actually chew their food properly.
I've seen those. They're like little mazes for dogs. So it's not
Right.
just the size of the food, but also how fast they eat it.
Exactly. Giving a dog a big chunk of food that they can't break down easily is just as risky as giving them a small toy.
So we've covered toys, we've covered food, but dogs are curious creatures. They love to explore with their mouths. There's got to be more we need to think about, right?
You're absolutely right. And that's why supervision is so important. Whenever your dog is playing with toys, chewing on a bone, or just hanging out in the yard, it's important to keep an eye on them.
So it's about being present and engaged with our dogs, not just assuming they'll be fine on their own, but let's be real, we can't watch them every second of the day. Is there anything we can do to make our home safer, even when we're not right there with them?
The guide suggests creating safe zones for your dog. These are areas where you've removed all the potential choking hazards and where your dog can relax without you having to worry.
So it's kind of like doggy-proofing our homes, but specifically with choking hazards in mind.
Exactly. Think about it like this. If you have young children, you baby-proof your home to keep them safe. You can do the same thing for your dog, especially if they're prone to chewing on things that don't.
That's a great way to think about it. It makes perfect sense. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from staying calm to performing the Heimlich to creating those safe zones. Anything else in the guide that really stood out to you as important or maybe even surprising?
You know, one thing that surprised me was how much emphasis the guide puts on the emotional side of things, like how our own fear and panic can actually make it harder to help our dog.
That's really interesting. It's almost like our dogs can sense our energy. So if we're freaking out, it's just going to make them more stressed.
Exactly. The guide says that we need to think of ourselves as our dog's advocate in these situations. We need to be the calm and steady presence that they can rely on.
So it's not just about the physical actions, it's also about providing that emotional support. It's a good reminder that we're in this together. So we've talked about prevention, we've talked about what to do in the moment, but what about afterwards? Let's say you've successfully dislodged the object. Your dog seems to be okay, but you're still feeling shaken up. What does the guide say about dealing with those emotions?
It emphasizes the importance of self-care. It's normal to feel a whole range of emotions after something like that. Relief, guilt, anxiety. The guide encourages people to talk about how they're feeling with a friend, a family member, or even a therapist.
That's so true. We often focus so much on our dog's physical well-being that we forget about taking care of ourselves.
And if you're really struggling to cope, the guide even suggests seeking professional help.
Wow, This really highlights how being a responsible dog owner is about so much more than just providing food and water. It's about being prepared for the unexpected, both physically and emotionally.
I couldn't agree more. And it's about recognizing that even if we do everything right, sometimes things happen that are beyond our control.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of important information about choking hazards and how to respond to them. But before we move on, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about practicing these techniques. Can you talk a little bit more about why that's so important?
Of course, the guide really stresses the importance of familiarizing yourself with these techniques before you need them. It's just like anything else, practice makes perfect.
So it's not enough to just read about it or watch a video. We need to actually get hands-on.
Exactly. The more you practice, the more confident and efficient you'll be in a real emergency. The guide suggests practicing on a stuffed animal or even with a willing human friend.
I love that. It takes the pressure off and makes it a little more fun.
Right.
And I imagine it helps to solidify the steps in your mind so you're not trying to remember them under stress.
That's the idea. It's about turning those theoretical steps into muscle memory so you can react instinctively when every second counts.
All right, so we've all got our homework assignment practice, practice, practice. But before we send our listeners off to grab their nearest stuffed animal, I want to make sure we've covered all the essential takeaways. Can you give us a quick recap of the most important points?
Sure. First and foremost, remember that staying calm is crucial. Your dog is looking to you for guidance, so even if you're feeling panicked, try to project an aura of confidence and control. Take those deep breaths, count to 10, whatever helps you to center yourself. Okay, so you want the most important points to remember. Well, the first one's easy. It's stay calm. Your dog is looking to you to lead the way, so try to be that confident presence for them. Even if you're freaking out on the inside, take those deep breaths, count to 10, do whatever you got to do to stay focused.
Good advice.
What else?
Okay, next, you need to quickly assess the situation. How serious is this? Is your dog coughing or are they silent and can't breathe? Can they make any noise at all? Your next steps depend on the answers to those questions.
Okay, so we've checked how serious it is. Now, if you can actually see the object and you can safely reach it, then you can try and remove it. But if it's lodged in there really good or you're just not sure, don't force it.
So no at-home surgery then?
Nope, let the professionals handle that. If you can't reach it safely, then it's Heimlich time. And remember, the technique is a little different depending on if you've got a small dog or a large dog. And whatever you do, make sure those thrusts are quick and firm. We want to get that air moving.
Got it. Quick and firm. What if the Heimlich doesn't work?
Then try back blows. Especially if your dog is on the smaller side, you want to do those sharp blows right between the shoulder blades with the heel of your hand.
Okay, I'm writing all this down. Anything else I should be writing?
One more super important thing. Even if you get the object out and your dog seems like they're breathing fine, you still need to get them to the vet right away.
So no matter what, a trip to the vet is a must.
Got it.
Why is that so important if they seem okay?
Because sometimes choking can cause internal damage that we just can't see, and you don't want to wait for something serious to happen down the road.
So it's like preventative maintenance. Makes sense.
Yeah.
What about prevention? Any key takeaways there?
Yeah, make sure your dog's got appropriate toys. Use a slow feed bowl if they gobble their food down, and always supervise them when they're playing with toys or chewing on bones.
And we can also set up those safe zones in our homes where we know there's nothing dangerous lying around. Great tips. I feel so much more prepared now. But before we wrap up this episode, is there anything else you want our listeners to remember?
You know, at the end of the day, it's all about being prepared. We can't prevent every accident, but we can make sure we know what to do if something happens.
Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. And it can make all the difference in an emergency situation.
So true. Well, I think this has been an incredibly informative deep dive. We've learned so much about choking hazards, how to perform the Heimlich maneuver, and most importantly, how to prevent these situations from happening in the first place.
It's been great talking about this with you, and hopefully our listeners are feeling empowered to keep their furry friends safe.
That's what we like to hear. Remember, everyone, practice makes perfect. So grab a stuffed animal or a willing friend and start practicing those techniques today. You never know when you might need them. And that's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.